Hello, and welcome to another episode of DLT's ContinuousX podcast, where we attempt to solve for X in the SDLC equation. My name is Rick Stewart, DLT's Chief Software Technologist, and joining me is my co-host and colleague, Mike Fitzurka, Senior Sales Engineer for Application Lifecycle Technologies. Today's guest is Jared Patrick, Senior Software and DevOps and PaaS Consultant for Cornerstone Technologies. Jared has been in development and technology experience for over 10 years. He has the ability to truly bring dev and ops together and communicate the best solutions that meet our customers' needs. Whether a solution requires automation, microservices, development, or OpenShift deployments, he's always there with new and innovative ideas. Welcome, Jared.
Hi.
Hey, fun fact, Jared's boss, Gary Schaefer, is a former DLTer and a colleague of Mike and me for a few years. I mention this only because, as our viewers can attest, this forum is a Q&A style, and each incorrect answer from Jared will cost Gary a lunch at his expense for me and Mike. So let's get started.
Awesome. All right. Okay, over the past couple of years, we've been hearing a lot of chatter about software supply chain management. Why do you think the supply chain has moved to the forefront of everyone's mind, and why has it become so important?
Yeah, I think it's becoming important. More and more companies are realizing that the supply chain really is essential to software. In the beginning, or I won't say in the beginning, but early on when you're doing software development, you're really focused on the code. You're really focused on the features and the things that you're just trying to deliver to your customers. But as things scale, as the needs and the complexity of the business increases, being able to deliver value is increasingly difficult. And that's really where your software supply chain management comes in place. It allows you to really define exactly what your software requirements are around the way that you write the code, test the code, deploy the code, your compliance and regulatory requirements. And it really gives you the ability to glue all that together to generate greater agility, give you more insight into your actual software practices, the way that you're developing, deploying, and doing all those different steps. It also increases consistency and efficiency. And of course, it also helps you tackle any security issues that you also might have that you have to satisfy with your software.
Great answer, Jared. Any specific software supply chain activities that pose specific challenges in the public sector? You mentioned compliance and regulations, but any specific activities?
Yeah, I really think the majority of the difficulty is around the entire development lifecycle process. That comes down to really like your security specific challenges, mainly around the level of security requirements that you have in a public sector environment, right? Whether or not you have to operate in a FedRAMP type environment, right. Or do you have different types of infrastructure type requirements like staging or other types of things that might not necessarily be the case in say in a private sector type environment. So you have a whole lot more scrutiny around the way that you do just your standard software practices, and that really comes down to testing the entire software delivery cycle. Change control is also a really big portion of that process. And a software supply chain helps you with all of that because let's say you get to that change control part of your process, it's very easy to document everything that occurred in a given change from your testing, from your build, pipeline automation. That's also your security and everything that will come out of your security reports to really assist you in all of the different steps that have to happen in the supply chain at the level that is needed for the types of applications that are being delivered in public sector.
Agreed. That's why. Go ahead, Nick.
I would also say it seems that securing the pipeline itself, the elements of the pipeline, seems to be a big issue these days as well. That's come up. I think various hacks and everything that it's now required to give a bill of materials. What am I doing to create this in order to work with the government? That's going to be becoming hype. So I think that's also yes. These the pipeline can help with security, but you also have to make sure that you secure it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's one thing that you find too is, I draw the comparison because a lot of what you're starting to see the public sector beginning to adopt has been practices that have been very common and growing in the private sector. A lot of that drives the software industry, but the adaptation of those things has been slower in public sector simply because of the level of compliance and regulatory and, like you said, security requirements around those things. And as all of these practices start to transition, across these sectors, like you said, Fitz, people start asking those questions. Well, that's really great. This new tool can do this awesome thing, but how secure is that solution in and of itself? Even though it might help with the supply chain, you've got to have all the compliance and security pieces in place. So yeah, that's definitely a huge part of it.
And that I want to dovetail off of what Mike said because I think that's very important. When you talk about the embracement of containers and Kubernetes, and specifically with open source software, there are a lot of agencies that still do not understand the levels of layers of that software that still need to be compliant, scanned, checked, etc. We've had several conversations. I think I bring it up on every podcast that we have, where we have some system administrators adopting containers only to think that it's going to relieve them of the security factor. And actually, it brings in more risk with them when they're trying to accommodate the developers by allowing them root access to deploy their applications because that's what the container requires. However, that's not the best practice. That's why it's very important that containers, your strategy needs to be holistic when it comes to the entire software stack that you're delivering and the permissions that you're delivering. So I wonder if you can speak to some of your experiences with that and attest to what we're hearing in the field as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those are all great points, and it's definitely one of the things that organizations who do want to adopt specifically, I would say not organizations, but different areas in public sector want to adopt those different types of container technologies, Kubernetes. It's not just as out of the box thing that just is secure by nature. Again, a lot of that is all started in private sector, and a lot of it is open source, right? So security is not always at the top priority list for those solutions, and that's why you've got to go with hardened solutions. And working through those processes of doing that hardening, either by adopting an existing vendor that already has something that works or doing it yourself. And, it's really the technology, right, in containers is really awesome. It's amazing how it allows you to isolate dependencies and control your deployments. But in effect, it's an operating system, right? And it should be treated as a small operating system because inside of that container, there is some type of distribution, and more than likely Linux, and the different levels of compliance and regulatory constraints that you have running those same types of operating systems in a virtual machine or bare metal machine, those same types of compliance requirements are still required even in that container. And that's why something like a software supply chain management system is very important, even at the container layer, because the containers, they're not they're not like a magic wand that just makes everything so much easier. They still have all of those basic granular security compliance practices that you would have even if you were developing on an alternative that's not containers.
Well, damn it, Jared. That was a great answer. Now we owe Gary a lunch on this one. That was a good answer. Thanks.
Let's shift a little bit here and let's talk about a key component of the supply chain management being automation. Have you seen automation being brought to bear in delivering software for the public sector, or where have you seen that take place?
Absolutely. I would say it's becoming more and more common. And when you say where, I say the majority of organizations that are out there that are adopting DevOps practices in general, they're usually using some form of automation. And that's going to be essential when we talk about everything ranging from the provisioning of infrastructure, whether or not that's cloud infrastructure or not. Everything has to have someone do something to get it right there, right? To bring it to life, whether or not it's standing up a virtual machine or configuring networks or whatever that might be. And automation is key. It's key. And a lot of times you say it's key and people think automation, you say, oh, if I automate it away, the whole point is to just make it to where a human doesn't have to touch it. And that is a huge part of it. But there's so many other benefits to automation. And I think one of the biggest benefits that sort of gets overlooked because of the ability for it to just be done without a human having to touch it is consistency. Right? Consistency is a huge issue, right? You could have a regulatory type process where maybe you have to have password rotations or key rotations or other types of security things in your environment, and you could automate those things away. But you're benefiting from the consistency of ensuring that not only is the process not something that a human being has to touch, but now you've created a more algorithm-based approach to the way that you're rotating those keys, which lowers your threshold for errors and ensures that those keys get properly rotated, preventing security breaches or just other types of things that could happen, right? So automation is essential to any modern software supply chain process, no matter which type of automation you're using. It's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think some of the cultural differences in the public sector is if there's not some human or some person responsible for it, then they get a little bit risk averse with doing it. But I think the reverse is actually true. You're now freeing that resource up to do more beneficial things for the organization instead of just more mundane and routine things. So I think your point is valid.
Yeah. And I think as a side note to that too, Rick, is there's definitely I feel like as a world, right? When you talk automation, going back to that point that, well, it's basically putting a machine in place of a human,
right?
But a machine can never replace a human, right? The human still has to make that machine understand the process,
right?
And it's really empowering engineers to take those mundane or even difficult tasks and put it into some process that now they didn't necessarily manage, but they manifested, right? And now is your knowledge inside of a system that system can now operate independently. And to your point, it's now I can move on to that next task and do that. So I think we still get to leave our mark in our automation. It's not this thing of like, oh my God, I automated myself out of an opportunity here.
Right.
It's really you just made your mark, and now that machine has a slice of your understanding of a process, which is really powerful, I think.
Yeah. The paradox is you actually made your stuff more valuable.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you never run out of things to automate.
Exactly.
There's always more. There's always more unique tasks or twists to a change that you need to then automate again. Yeah, you're not automating yourself out of business.
And that brings me to my next question. And Fitz, you brought me into it nicely. What are some of those techniques that you just mentioned an organization can implement to ensure frequent delivery of high quality software?
Yeah, you mean in a general sense or specifically around automation?
Yeah, automation is a technique, but a specific instance of an automation, deployment, et cetera. We talked about Kubernetes, talked about pipelines, those types of things. But along those lines.
Yeah, I think I would say from an ideology standpoint, a DevSecOps practice is, I think, that the most crucial step in being able to adopt a software supply chain. And by that, I speak more to the cultural and collaboration aspects of what DevSecOps are. We can talk about the tools, and that's going to be my second point, which would be the second answer to the question you asked. But DevSecOps is obviously tooling, but a huge part of it is the culture, and it's about tearing down silos. It's about strong collaboration. It's about building something together. And I know it can sound like really cliche and cheesy, like we're all sitting around a campfire, trying to build something like, yay, let's go, guys. But really, like there's that spirit of collaboration. It drives innovation. It motivates. It's a really powerful concept, just adopting that type of culture that says, we're tearing down all these barriers. We're going to shift left, bring our security in early. We're going to have strong conversations with our infrastructure teams and our development teams to make sure that there's an inherent understanding of the requirements around dev and infrastructure. we're bringing our quality assurance or quality care type teams in, and the individuals who are doing the testing on our code and everything else, and we're building this strong collaboration so that we never throw anything over the wall, right? And everyone has a strong focus area, but a shared responsibility.
Yes,
is a massive part of that. And I think once that cultural barrier is broken, at least there's some intrigue in adopting that type of thing, then I believe the answer to deploying your software supply chain is a form of secure software factory.
yes,
You need some baseline platform that is going to keep you on the rails while you're trying to go down this process. And there's new learning, which is very specific to the needs of what you are building, and then there's that which has been learned, which has been common, things that are adopted in industry that you can leverage, and you don't have to go and build yourself, right?
right.
And I think knowing what vendors are already out there that fit in, and that's the beauty of something like a secure software factory, is when we talk factory terminology, we say we're bringing something from point A to Z, and all those letters in between. Ideally, there should be some form of a vendor or some solution that we can plug in,
right,
in all those different steps along the way. And now you're looking at your software as a really long chain of a factory of a box moving down that line, and everyone having strong knowledge and very, very, very specific subject matter expertise about what's being built and how everything in it is operating. Right, having wide knowledge about it is important.
And I think it's so apt what you're saying, Jared, because it's not, everybody gets this image of the software, the factory floor where you have widgets going in, and no one can affect that assembly line. And the opposite is true, that everyone gets to contribute to that assembly line and make it better continuously. And to steal the cliche from this podcast title, that's what we're trying to convey. This is a never-ending process, and it's not a never-ending process of just the software being developed and delivered constantly. It's the actual tooling and the actions, the activities, the insertions of innovative things into that assembly line that makes this more powerful and very interesting to work within, because it's not just going to a factory and stamping out widgets all day.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that software is best approached as a human process.
Yes,
and then we think of how that human process affects other humans. I mean, we're not building software for machines to consume, right? I mean, we build the things we build to better people's lives, and I think that that as an idea in that software factory is this solution bettering our lives? Is it bettering our process? Is it making us more efficient? And if the process is stifling creativity, innovation, if it's stifling deliverability, stifling security, or just any of those things, that I think, like you said, I think you do need the ability to affect that factory. And that is really where I say platform, because the platform should facilitate all those plugins and things that you can put in.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I believe you should definitely have some form of a reference thing out of the box that says, I have no idea what I'm doing, help me, right? but as you grow and learn, and I think that's a huge part of it too. And I have to take too long on this one point, but a platform that does not just enable, but a platform that also educates.
Yes.
Right? The education is a huge part of it, because you still want people to bring innovative ideas to the table, even when they're using that factory.
Yes.
Can this tool do this thing better, or could there be a better tool for it? Right? Ask those questions and still have innovation even within the factory, right? And those proposals could go back to the organization that you're working with. But again, strong spirit of collaboration across the tools you're using and across your team is really, really what it's all about, I think.
And I think a pro tip for our listeners, you have to look for the effects, the emotional effects of people involved with a software factory or a supply chain. If they're not having joy and they're not finding benefit to this, there's something wrong with the process, because a byproduct of this, and this should be a byproduct for every working condition, is you should enjoy going to work. You should enjoy being involved with this process. If you're not enjoying it, then something's awry. And again, you need to tweak it to the point where people are getting benefit from it.
Can't say more than that. That's
Sorry.
that's good.
Mic drop.
All right. Well, we like to wrap up all of these podcasts with asking our something along the lines of our ContinuousX title. If there's anything that you could do or anything you could maybe have continuously, what would you want it to be?
And don't ask for world. Don't say world peace or nothing.
World peace.
No.
Oh man. I mean, I don't want to sound cliche here, but I'd be happy if we all had continuously high quality code, you know?
Really? Hey, all right.
It takes that. All right.
Awesome. Jared, that'll about do it for this episode. We'd like to thank all you viewers for your time and attention. Thank you, Jared, for the information you shared with us today. We will have your former employer, Deloitte, tally up the score of incorrect answers so we can start scheduling the lunches Gary owes us. But seriously, thank you for helping us understand DevSecOps concepts as we continue to solve for X in the SDLC equation.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.